tell you a story. We have a foreign invasion, and we have some young boys who are kidnapped from their families. They're taken over 1,000 miles away from their home, where they'll not only never see their home again, but never see their family again. These young men are brainwashed. They're castrated. They become the servants in the king's household for the rest of their lives. Let me tell you about some other boys. These boys are given the best food so that they're healthy. They are given the best education that their country could possibly offer in the best of the university. They are given the best housing. They're given the best of everything and an opportunity to be influential and powerful in the nation. Now, which set of boys do you think is going to succeed? The first group or the second group? Second group. What if I told you that they're the same boys? You might know them. They're in the Bible. They're known as Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were captured by the Babylonians, taken to Babylon, where they would never see their homeland or their family again. They were given the best education the Babylonians had to offer in Babylonian theology, Babylonian politics, Babylonian worldview. They were taken when they were young because the Babylonians believed that they could brainwash these young men. They were given great food and great housing because the intention was to brainwash them so that they would be able to serve inside the king's palace without any concern about potential rebellion or that they might try to do something in the royal house would not be good. In other words, we have two different ways of viewing the same boys, the same story. It's interesting, the way you present it makes it sound like two different sets of guys, doesn't it? Okay, some of you are just clueless. Well, let's try it this way. If someone was to ask you, who is the greatest athlete in history? Your answer would be based not on fact, but on the sports that you like. I mean, most people would think a football player or a basketball player or somebody like that. Most people wouldn't think Red Grange. Say, who in the world is that? So do I need to give you a minute to look it up on Google? Like some of you are going to hear the next 2 minutes because you're busy trying to figure out, how do I spell Grange? You know, I mean, we think of maybe someone that made an impact like a Jesse Owens. I mean, how do we, and it's really interesting because we typically think of Americans. Like if you were trying to run through your brain the mental Rolodex of great athletes, how many of you really started with some European soccer player? How many started with Ronaldo? Like, oh yeah, he's the top of the list. Or Bjorn Borg. So you go, who is that? He played tennis. Some of you have no idea again what I'm talking about. Then there might be a few of you who even thought, okay, yeah, I can do that. I think of a few people that aren't American. But how many of you thought of, like, not even a human being? There are some people who believe that Secretariat was the greatest athlete ever. Now, some of you are totally done at this point. The reason you're totally done is you're thinking animals can't be athletes. Really? Have you ever noticed that some dogs can't seem to get off the front porch? And others seem to be able to glide across. I mean, animals, some are more athletic and others are like you. So trying to identify the greatest athlete, you'll try to present facts to bolster your case. And then we'll get into even a specific sport. Who's the greatest basketball player of all time? No. There's only one player in history who has more rings than fingers. Bill Russell. He even coached a couple of those. See, because I'm a Boston Celtics fan, it's over. Like the discussion's already over. I'm honest enough to admit I think Bill Russell's the greatest basketball player ever because I'm a Boston Celtics fan, and he is the greatest basketball player ever. He has 11 championship rings. If we're going to have, do we even need to keep going here? Who's the greatest clay tennis? Well, everybody pretty much agree, Rafael Nadal. So maybe that's not a good one. But just who what sports you watch. Some are thinking, well, he didn't say anything about cornhole. Trust me, if things keep going like they are, we'll all know who the great cornhole athletes are. Because that's like the only sport that's active right now. That and NASCAR. And some of you just can't stand to watch cars going ovals. Not circles, and ovals. So what does ESPN have right now? Cornhole. And they keep showing the championship over and over and over again. And don't look at me like you have no idea. I bet some of you in here wouldn't admit to it, but you've watched some of that cornhole stuff. But you're just as freaked out as I am. Do you know how I play cornhole? Y'all know what I'm talking about? We have the little bean bags with corn. You try to throw them in the little thing. It's got the hole in it. My approach to cornhole is very simple. It's called toss and pray. How many of you, if you ever played, that's how you play? It's toss and pray. Maybe you didn't play cornhole, but you've played horseshoes, and it's the exact same philosophy. Toss and pray. Not these guys. He's going to make it land here to bump this one this way and make this one go in. And I'm thinking, how can you do that? I mean, I'm just thrilled if I hit the board. Much less get it through the little hole. So you think, what about the cornhole champ? In other words, your kind of perspective, the way you view it, is going to dramatically influence who you would define as greatest athlete. It's kind of just has to do with the way we look at it. What about music? Oh boy, here we go. Nothing seems to get people going like talking about music. I mean, let's face it. There's a broad array. If I was to ask you what the best kind of music is, some of you would say, not country. Oh, please. A bunch of music about how you lose everything. Your wife, your dog, your truck. It's headbanging acid rock. That is the best type of music. My wife actually is convinced that the type of music you listen to tells the way your brain works. If you're always thinking, your mind's just always running all the time, you like really fast, aggressive music because it's like your brain. It just doesn't stop. And then other people who are more relaxed, like more relaxed music. You know how you tell if it's classical music? No words. And then if we get classical music, like who's the greatest composer ever? Well, piano music, so it's got to be Tchaikovsky. Or you like martial music, so it's got to be Wagner. Or maybe it's Bach or Beethoven or Brahms. And of course, obviously your name needs to start with a B to be considered. But again, your perspective. Who's the best band ever? Man, that really gets people going. And so, styles of music, what do you like? And then let me give you a couple more examples of what we're getting. Just think about this. We have a man who led his nation into a war that cost the lives of more citizens than anything else in the country's entire history. Before the war started, he demonstrated himself to be a hypocrite because he did something that was 180% or 180 degrees opposite of everything that he proclaimed. He is responsible for the deaths of more of his citizens than anyone else. How many of you would think that's a great leader? Most of you probably do because that was Abraham Lincoln. More American citizens died while Abraham Lincoln was president in the War of Northern Aggression. Okay, we're talking about perspective, right? More American citizens died in that war than any other time in American history, even World War II. The way you define it, you say, what do you mean he was a hypocrite? Abraham Lincoln said he wanted to believe in the Union, but one of the first things they did was help West Virginia secede from Virginia. Don't worry, Jefferson Davis was also a hypocrite because he said our state has the right to secede, and he went to war to say that West Virginia could not secede from Virginia. It's all about just the way you kind of look at him. You can present even someone that has a giant monument in Washington, D.C. and gets his face on money and has movies made about him killing vampires. But the way you kind of describe them, how many of you thought I was describing Abraham Lincoln? It's all about kind of the perspective. Let me tell you about another leader. When he was elected to lead his country, 1 out of every 4 adults were unemployed. The economy was in shambles. So after elected, He provided jobs for people. He's the one who invented the interstate. He's the first leader to perceive or to envision that every family would have an automobile. He was one of the first leaders to institute a 5-day work week for the country. He was a vegetarian. He did not drink. And he refused to get married because he said he wanted to focus his sole attention on the betterment of the country. That sounds like a pretty good leader. That was Adolf Hitler. So let me say again, so that we grasp what I want us to get. The way we present people tells a lot about our perspective. I would hope that no matter how I present him, none of you would admire Adolf Hitler. I thought I'd get an amen. Y'all are really making me nervous. I would hope that none of you would admire Adolf Hitler. And I hope that you would admire, even with his faults and flaws, Abraham Lincoln. So I just want you to kind of soak this in for a minute and think about the way we present people. Because the Bible has a lot of people in it. Do you know how I know? Because I could write Bible trivia that nobody could pass. All I got to do is go to the first 10 chapters of 1 Chronicles and pull random names out that are mentioned nowhere else but there, that most of us couldn't even pronounce. There are a lot of people in the Bible, hundreds of people that are talked about in the Bible. And you know what the Bible does? The Bible gives us a perspective on those people. It doesn't tell us their whole life story. It doesn't give us every detail. Let me ask you this question. Who was the mother of Jesus? Oh my goodness. Who was the mother of Jesus? Mary. Very good. Actually, she's the mother of Jesus, because there's lots of other people that are named Mary. She's Mary. All right. So somebody tell me what she did between the ages of 22 and 30. It's an 8-year block. Yeah, do you know why you're silent? Because so is the Bible. The Bible tells us about the conception and the birth of Jesus, a couple of episodes from his early years. We run into Mary a few other times in the Bible, but we don't read a whole lot about her. Because if the Bible told us everything about everybody, there's no books big enough to hold all of that. So the Bible gives us snippets, and they're intended to give us a perspective. So I want us to look at 1 Kings chapter 16, because we have 3 individuals, but one in particular I wanted to discuss. And it gives us a perspective about each one of those, and I think it's going to be instructive for us about the way we view people and view God and the world and history and all that. So if you turn to 1 Kings chapter 16, we're going to pick up in verse 15. We have 3 consecutive kings that only take up about 19 or 20 verses. Zimri, Omri, and Ahab. So the first one we see is Zimri, verse 15. In the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, Zimri reigned 7 days in Tirzah. Now, let me just pause to say right here, sometimes facts are not perspective, they are just facts. This guy reigned 1 week. I don't know that there's anywhere in the world that would be considered a long reign. So he makes it 7 days. Now, at the same time, in the southern kingdom of Judah, so we have 10 tribes in the north, that's Israel, 2 tribes in the south, that's Judah. So he's the king over the 10 northern tribes called Israel. So for 7 days he reigns in the city of Tirzah. Now the troops were encamped against Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines. And the troops who were encamped heard it, said, Zimri has conspired and he has killed the king. So he's killed the previous king named Elah. Therefore all Israel made Omri, the commander of the army, king over Israel that day in the camp. So Omri went up from Gibbethon, and all Israel with him, and they besieged Tirzah. And when Zimri saw that the city was taken, he went into the citadel of the king's house and burned the king's house over him with fire and died. So he commits suicide by burning himself to death in the house. Verse 19, because of the sins that he committed, doing evil in the sight of the Lord, walking in the way of Jeroboam, and for his sin which he committed, making Israel to sin. Now the rest of the acts of Zimri and the conspiracy that he made, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? That being kind of their daily diary. Now, what do we know about Zimri? The Bible gives us just a glimpse, just a perspective. Okay? He attempts a coup and is semi-successful, but it only lasts a week. before he gets ousted. And then look how the Bible describes him. Why is he removed from king? Because the Lord saw to it, because the sin, verse 19, the sins he committed, doing evil in the sight of the Lord, walking away of Jeroboam, which was the 2 golden calves that they worshipped, and for the sin which he committed, making Israel to sin. In other words, the Bible says, here's just a perspective on Zimri. Do you think Zimri was a good king or a bad king? Well, he's a bad king. That's why the Bible says he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he did the sins of his father Jeroboam. Now we get verse 21. And I want to talk a little bit about this king, because he's the key to understanding what we're reading the Bible right here and what I want to get across. So, verse 21, then the people of Israel divided into 2 parts. Half of the people followed Tibni, the son of Ginath, to make him king, and half followed Omri. But the people who followed Omri overcame the people who followed Tibni, the son of Ginath. So Tibni died, and Omri became king. In the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, Omri began to reign over Israel, and he reigned for 12 years. 6 years he reigned in Tirzah. He bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver, about 150 pounds of silver. And he fortified the hill and called the name of the city that built Samaria after the name of Shemer, the owner of the hill. So I guess it'd be kind of cool to have a city named after you, Smithville, or whatever your name is, Paulopolis. So verse 25, Omri did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did more evil than all who were before him. For he walked in all the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, in the sins that he made Israel to sin, provoking the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger by their idols. Now the rest of the acts of Omri that he did, and the might that he showed, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And Omri slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria, and Ahab his son reigned in his place. Now I want to talk a little bit about Omri. He is unique and pretty impressive guy. Even what we read in here. He overthrows Zimri, and then there's a civil war between Omri and Tibni, the son of Ginath. We're reading verse 21, and Omri is a very successful military strategist, and so he overcomes this rival to the throne. But there are some things that we need to understand about Omri. Who's his dad? We don't know. Matter of fact, it's unusual to read about a king and not have his dad mentioned, especially once on the throne for 12 years. As a matter of fact, it's interesting. Omri is not even a Hebrew word. Now, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, so all their names are Hebrew. Very good. So Shemer is a Hebrew name, and Tibni and Ginath, they're Hebrew names. But Omri is not a Hebrew name. Matter of fact, there are many scholars who believe that Omri is the king of Israel, and he is not an Israelite. So we have this guy who has no name, and it's interesting because you kind of see this contrast right there in verse 21, because we have Tibni, the son of Ginath. So we have the rival, his dad is mentioned. So you would think that Omri's dad's name, his line would be mentioned, but it's not. Just the name Omri, and that's kind of all that we know about him. His throne to the trail is bloody. He's off to 2 guys who are rivals, Zimri and Tibni, the son of Ginath. So he has a very bloody trail to the throne, but we also see that he has built a city and a name for himself. As a matter of fact, the construction of the city of Samaria is where we get the term Samaritans that's used in the New Testament. It goes all the way back to here. So, we're looking at 800 years, give or take a little bit, 900 years before the New Testament. It goes back to this. So it makes the capital city Samaria. Samaria is an interesting location. It's surrounded by hills. Normally you wouldn't build a city in a valley because the enemy could come down on you, but there's a little hill in the middle of the valley, and that's the hill that the city was built on. So you could see them coming down the mountains, but then they were below you, and so you could see them come up. So it was actually a pretty strategic place to build a capital city. So he builds the city here in order to make a name for himself, and from now on, Samaria is going to be the capital of this tribe. So that's kind of what he did militarily and politically. But what's the worst thing that Omri did? He walked in all the ways of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, the sins he made Israel sin, provoking the Lord to anger, verse 26. But maybe even worse than that is he gave birth to a horrible son. he raised a son who has no interest in doing the things of God. So look what we read in verse 29. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab the son of Omri began to reign over Israel. And Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. So now watch. Omri did worse than everybody before him. And now Ahab says, I'm going to outdo Dad. I'm going to out-sin my dad. I'm going to out-disobey my dad. I'm going to out-evil my dad. So he does more evil than all who are before him. Verse 31, and as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, now we run into his wife, who's probably more popular than he is, at least more well-known than he is. He took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. So he's married a woman who is from Sidon, and her dad is the king of Phoenicia, dwells in Sidon. And she and her husband are now worshiping a false god right here in the capital city. Verse 32, he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Now, Asherah is the female deity that's connected with Baal, the male deity. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid his foundation at the cost of Abiram, his firstborn, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua, the son of Nun. Now, let's just talk about him a little bit. He's done worse than his dad did, because not only did he do the sins of Jeroboam, but he's married Jezebel. Now, lots of people don't know who Jezebel was, but they know the name. And we typically don't associate with goodness, because she is a Baal worshiper. And she will manipulate Ahab a number of times. And I'm not giving Ahab a pass. He's just as complicit as she is. So sometimes when we say she manipulated, it makes it sound like he's an innocent dupe. No, they're both wicked, wicked people. The king was to marry an Israelite. So we have the son of someone who may not have been an Israelite, who's marrying someone who clearly is not, who is the daughter of a king, and they are serving the Baal and Asherah. And not just that, he builds the temple to Baal and a statue right there in the middle of the city. Now, we get this interesting statement here at the end. Verse 34 about Hiel building Jericho, and it cost him the life of his two sons. Well, when they destroyed the city of Jericho all the way back in Joshua, chapter 6, remember they walked around the city? The walls came tumbling down. Joshua made this proclamation in Joshua 6:26 that if anyone tried to rebuild the city, they would build it on the foundation of their firstborn, the gates on their second son. So this is a fulfillment of the prediction that we find in Joshua chapter 6 and verse 26. So that's in there to show us how disobedient they were to God. Now that's sort of kind of the history of what we read. But I want you to note something that is not in the Bible, but helps us understand what the Bible is talking about. And that's this guy, Omri. Omri, of all the kings of Israel, is without question the most influential, powerful, successful of all the kings. As a matter of fact, we've uncovered a lot of documents from the ancient world, a lot of Persian documents. That's how we know a lot about the world of Ezekiel and Daniel and those guys. We've uncovered an entire library of a city called Ugarit, which existed in the days of Abraham. We'll learn a lot about his culture and the way things were. We've actually uncovered a lot of it. We covered a library of official Assyrian documents. It's really interesting. When you read what Assyria did, Assyria would talk about, we went and conquered Tyre and Sidon. Not if you're kind of with me. We defeated Egypt. I'll just keep naming off countries till you figure out what I'm talking about. We defeated Philistia. That's the Philistines. We defeated Moab. We defeated Ammon. Are y'all just waiting to see how many countries I know? You nod that you understand what I'm saying. They list the names of the nations they defeat. Does that not make good sense? Of course it does. So they would list the names. It's interesting. In the Assyrian records, there's no mention of defeating Israel, though there are a lot of references to the nation. Here's the reason. In Assyrian documents, it's not called the land of Israel. It's called the land of Omri. That's how powerful he was. See, from the Assyrians' perspective, Omri is strong, powerful, wealthy, successful. From the Assyrians' perspective, Omri is the most important, significant king they ever have. From God's perspective, he gets 8 verses. Just 8 verses. Because you see, people who are important from God's perspective, oftentimes the world does not see as important. And people that the world says are important, oftentimes God says, I'm going to give them 8 verses, just tell us how bad he was. It is interesting, we find this statement about Omri, though. Just this one kind of drop sort of in here. Look at what it says about Omri in verse 27. Now the rest of the acts of Omri that he did, and the might that he showed. That's how the world defines success. Do you have political might, economic might, positional might? Do you have strength? That's how the world defines success. How can you get to the top, and who's on top, and who can stay on top? But God does not define success that way. So from God's perspective, Omri gets just these handful of verses, and that's it. Because from God's perspective, he is evil, not successful. He is wicked and not good. So what do I want us to walk away from this in our minds? 2 things. Number 1, we of all people should be the most gracious with dealing with other people, because we recognize that their perspective is not always the same as ours. And we do not believe that our perspective is better than theirs. How can we do that? By listening. Listen to people. James 1:19 says this, "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger." We need to be understanding that people have a different perspective. Let me give you just a goofy example, but what I'm kind of talking about. I was raised in a small town in South Arkansas. I still sound like that occasionally. Where are you from? And y'all know I don't have an accent. The rest of you have an accent. I talk normal. Small town, South Arkansas. I was raised right on the edge of town. Very, very safe community. Most days during the summer, we were out of the house at sunup and didn't come back except for lunch. Gone again. It didn't come back till after dark. My parents didn't have to worry about my safety and security and all that sort of thing. So a lot of times we leave the car doors unlocked. Sometimes leave the keys in the car. So very just kind of safe growing up. My wife, on the other hand, lived several places, including Chicago, with her mom and sister. Now, when you're a single mom in Chicago with 2 daughters, you don't leave the doors unlocked. You don't let your kids run out and just play for hours on end and who knows where. So over the years, it has been very difficult for me to understand why, when we're home, living in a safe neighborhood like I live in, our house still needs to be a fortress. Why she's uncomfortable when I want to open the windows and let the breeze in, or just open the doors and and don't bother to lock the screens. I just have a different perspective on safety than my wife. It took a long time for me to listen well enough to realize she just views safety and security very differently than I do. So now I let her lock the doors. And occasionally I try to remember to lock them myself. It is important for us as believers to recognize other people don't view the world the way we do. And I don't just mean as believers and non-believers. I mean just people are raised in different places. They have a different perspective. Look at me. I'm a white male that was raised in a middle-income, 2-parent home. That gives me a different perspective on our world than an African-American single mom living in a housing project in an inner city. And her children. And we need to recognize that there are people that because of their life experiences, they're going to have a different perspective. And you and I should learn to listen better. You can say amen right here if you're listening. We should be gracious. The second thing I want us to leave with is to remember that God's perspective is not ours. You and I do not treat people differently based on their success. We treat them the same because we recognize that God views people as created in His image. God views each person as unique and special. And God sees what really counts, and that is the heart. And a relationship with Him through His Son, Jesus Christ. Let me give you one last example of perspective. Let's take a man who has no political ambitions of any kind. He's homeless. He has no money. He has no formal education. He never wrote anything. He lived in a very remote country under the rule of a foreign nation. He was convicted as a criminal, as a rebel, and he was executed. Most of us would not see that individual as being very significant or important. But I'm telling you, Jesus Christ changed my life and my eternity. God's perspective is not yours and mine. God doesn't send His Son to be born in the best hospital with the best education, raised in a palace. God sends His Son to be born in a barn, laid in a stable, and to wander around a tiny little country for a handful of years, bring together a group of disciples who are not educated, powerful, influential. But the Bible says they turn the world upside down. God doesn't view things the way you and I do. You and I need to see people the way God sees them. And we need to understand that this man who never had a home, never had money, never had an education, never wrote anything, changed my life and can change theirs as well. Jesus may have been nothing in the eyes of the world, but He is everything in the eyes of God. And He should be everything in your eyes and mine. Omri gets 8 verses. Most powerful king they ever had. Jesus has 4 books of the New Testament written about His life. And the world would say He's irrelevant. We need to learn to live life with God's perspective on people.